Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where it looks like Disney might have another Frozen-sized hit on their hands. But even more so, the recent success of the Beauty and the Beast's first full live-action trailer shows that it was right to not only hire director Bill Condon, but it was right to also hire Emma Watson, because both of them seem to be bringing their own brand of magic to this Disney production, no matter what we might think of their actual creative contributions. So what's happening? Well, the Beauty and the Beast live action trailer just broke the record for the most viewed trailer in its first 24 hours. And this is a record that's getting broken all the time now, because Star Wars The Force Awakens was the first big record holder with 112 million views in 24 hours. Then 50 Shades Darker just recently dethroned it with 114 million views in its first 24 hours. And while that was a real squeaker, just a 2 million difference, Beauty and the Beast, the live-action trailer, demolished both of them with 127.6 million views in its first 24 hours. Now, the Beauty and the Beast trailer we've been discussing, and my shot-by-shot will go up later today, we've been discussing how it's very different in tone than not only the original, but also other Disney live-action movies. It's got a darker, more sensual, kinkier feel to it, right? But that's very Twilight, that's very 50 Shades. And those, of course, are two hugely successful properties. Controversially successful, mind you, so maybe Beauty and the Beast will share that controversy as well. But Bill Condon, mind you, directed the final two Twilight films, Breaking Dawn, so that might be one of the reasons that he was chosen, right? And some comparisons are already being made between Kristen Stewart's acting ability and Emma Watson's. But Kristen Stewart certainly didn't hurt Twilight, so perhaps Emma Watson won't hurt Beauty and the Beast. And when you think about the similarities in the stories, young woman loves a vampire, young woman loves a beast, right? Young woman loves kinky S&M guy, right? There are distinct similarities, and actually they all fit together. So Bill Condon has the Twilight background, and then Emma Watson, her star power on this film is amazing. She brought in 27 million views alone via her, I think, her Facebook page. And of course, traffic was driven there with the live chat that they did the morning of the release of the trailer over on Facebook. So everybody's doing their job, at least from a business perspective, in putting this production together, and it's very exciting indeed. So I had not thought of the Twilight 50 Shades comparison when it comes to Beauty and the Beast, but now I definitely see it, and it's very savvy on the part of Disney from a business perspective to tap into that. We'll see how fans feel about it, though. The Disney crowd is different than the Twilight 50 Shades crowd, or is it? And so it'll be interesting to see if those two fandoms can share the same space, the same movie. So speaking of Disney, as we all know, they're really heavily into the Lin Manuel Miranda business these days. They've invested heavily in him. He's doing the music for Moana. He does some of the singing. He's been promoting it. He was, when they did the photos at the premiere, it was Dwayne Johnson, Ali'i Cravajo, and Lin Manuel Miranda. He's also going to be the new Bert in Mary Poppins Returns. I love that title. And then also he's going to spearhead the Little Mermaid live-action film, which nobody paid attention to when that announcement was made. So as I've been saying, I don't know if Lin Manuel Miranda is like mainstream famous yet. He's certainly popular with the theater crowd, and he got Saturday Night Live trending on Twitter when he hosted, but you can trend on Twitter without being mainstream, because niche groups can do a great job taking over Twitter because they're very vocal, to their credit. So I don't know if this is going to end up to be a worthwhile investment. I have some problems with Lin Manuel Miranda's work on Moana. I think he's actually kind of the weakest part of the film. So we'll see how this works out for Disney. But they're not letting up on the collaborations here. As one of you sent me an article yesterday that John Lasseter apparently said they want to make a film, an animated movie from the ground up with Lin Manuel Miranda. They don't want to just put him on other movies like Moana. They want him to help create one. So John Lasseter said, why don't you start talking? This is how Lin Manuel Miranda described it. He said, why don't you start talking to Zootopia and Tangled co-director Byron Howard, and you guys can dream up an animated movie. And Lin Manuel Miranda said, oh yeah, we're on it. I don't know how long it will take because it takes a long time to do animated movies, and obviously Lin Manuel Miranda is very busy, but he said, we're on it. Now, I have to say, I think that the secret sauce in Zootopia was Rich Moore, not so much Byron Howard. With all due respect to Tangled, I don't think it has quite the zest that Zootopia does, and also Wreck-It Ralph, where Rich Moore is the constant there, working on Wreck-It Ralph, working on Zootopia. But Byron Howard might be a good director not to get in Lin Manuel Miranda's way. Rich Moore, I think, seems very creatively strong to me, and maybe they want someone to just back Lin Manuel Miranda up. And maybe an original property is the best idea for Lin Manuel Miranda. Mary Poppins, Little Mermaid, Moana, these things were all, something that he's joined. But Lin Manuel Miranda, if he can do like a Latino theatrical based kind of animated feature, that I think he does a very good job bringing diversity to. He's done a good job bringing diversity to the theater world. Maybe he can do that for the animated world, because although I don't think he did a good job with Moana. So we'll see what happens. But I think if he can just get the right story and do something like In the Heights or Hamilton, but in the animated space, it could be pretty interesting. But we'll see. Hamilton did very well as a Broadway show, but I don't know how it would do as a mainstream property, be it a movie, etc. Just like The Producers was obviously quite successful on Broadway, but never was able to transition to movies, even though they remade it. It was originally a movie, but then they remade it as a movie. And then, like Wicked still hasn't, crossed over, but Wicked ended up being Frozen. And then also the Book of Mormon, Josh Gad came from that, and he also joined Frozen. So Disney's done very well mining the theater community, but still, there's a little, the Disney animation isn't the theater community. But we'll have to see. As I've said with Beauty and the Beast, talking about the soundtrack, they're getting more and more entrenched with the theater community, and we'll see if that's a good idea. So those are the top two stories of the day. The third story is about Carmike Cinemas. Carmike Cinemas has been acquired, it was already a deal to be acquired by AMC for $1.2 billion, and the shareholders just approved it. And they're going to get a lot of money for their shares. Now this, in addition to the similar $1.2 billion acquisition of Europe's Odeon and UCI theaters, also approved by its shareholders, will now make AMC the biggest theater company, not just in the United States, surpassing Regal, but in the world, because again, that European purchase. And don't forget that AMC is owned by China's Wanda Group, which they purchased for $2.6 billion back in 2012. I wonder what they're going to do with all these theaters. There's a big problem with whether or not people feel they're getting value for going to see a movie in theaters these days, although AMC, of course, is slowly but surely switching over to reserved seats that are those big comfy recliners. So I think they're headed in the right direction. But one of the biggest problems with somebody who's a monopoly is that they feel since they're the only game in town, they don't have to work hard to be competitive, and that would be worrisome, especially because theaters are dirty enough as it is, and not particularly well policed in terms of talking during the show, being on your phone. So, but look for AMC. Once they become such a big, the dominant theater chain in the space, it'll be interesting to see if they do anything with that power. All right, so the viewer question, this is a great one. This comes from Abdevilliers, and Abdevilliers says, Grace, I hope you could answer my question, smiley face. It doesn't have to be an emoji. This is just a smiley face, with the keyboard. So Abdevilliers says, why is the blacklist considered such a big deal? For instance, Passengers is partly advertising itself by saying its screenplay was on the blacklist for a long time. But there are a lot of blacklist movies, good point, Advilliers, like Transcendence, Shut-In, Morgan, Pan, that turn out to be disasters. Is it just the director not doing a good job with the screenplay? Or do you think the blacklist doesn't carry any merit? Thank you, Grace. Smiley faces. Well, Advilliers, fabulous question, because of course yesterday we were talking about the Harley Quinn movie and how Christina Hodson has been hired as the screenwriter, and she has 3 movies on the blacklist, but Shut-In was one of them, and it ended up getting a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes and is an absolute box office flop. Well, here's what I think. I'd be curious to know if the blacklist might end up getting politicized to some degree, like for instance Sundance. A lot of times people get into the Sundance filmmakers labs because of who they know, which is a shame, but hopefully that doesn't happen to the blacklist. But if anything's decided by the human factor, you can always get to them, right? But I think for the most part, the blacklist is still pretty legit. But here's the thing. The blacklist is a bunch of scripts that haven't been produced, the best scripts that haven't been produced. And sometimes they're not produced for a reason. Often scripts on the blacklist are not mainstream. They're like intellectual. They have like there's something about them that makes, the producers say, I think this would be tricky to bring to the big screen. That's why they're unproduced. If they were unbelievable and they seem like fantastic movies and softballs that you could easily hit a home run with, of course someone would produce them, right? There has to be something that the studios are unsure about. Like, you're not going to have like this, it's a sequel, but for instance, if it's a real crowd pleaser, like let's say Jurassic World, right? That's not going to go on the blacklist. So that's one problem. I think that sometimes a script isn't produced for a reason. Then the other thing is that a great script doesn't mean a great movie, because so many things change from the point of saying, let's make this, to here's the movie we made. Because you have to remember that the influence of the director, the producer or producers, and the cast, etc., can be significant, and also the executives that end up producing said movie. So I think that's a really good way to illustrate that the Hollywood process, and that things can change quite a bit from the original screenplay that you read to the movie that you end up seeing. And it really depends on a director or a producer protecting that original property. We've seen the same thing recently with books, talking about why isn't this, or even Ghost in the Shell, like Rupert Sanders is like, oh, I could make a Ghost in the Shell movie that's faithful to the source material, but I'm much more interested in making my version of Ghost in the Shell. And everyone's like, who cares what Rupert Sanders' version of Ghost in the Shell is? You're Rupert Sanders. It's not like Steven Spielberg or Christopher Nolan or Martin Scorsese was like, here's what interests me about Ghost in the Shell. I mean, I think Rupert Sanders is really getting ahead of himself, and we'll see how it turns out. But anyway, that's my answer to your question, Advilliers. I think that the blacklist is legit. It does carry merit, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. And also, I think it's important to understand what the blacklist is. It's not a treasure trove of undiscovered screenplays. Everybody in Hollywood has read them. They're just not sure if they're bankable. And so sometimes everybody turns out to be right, or they mess them up in making the actual film. So anyway, thank you, everybody. That's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, and Advilliers' viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.